60 days on an alien world had taught Ruth Okonkwo one simple truth. The most dangerous creatures were often the most misunderstood. She sat cross-legged on the rocky ridge, her observation equipment forgotten beside her. Below, in the valley where the silver river curved like a sleeping snake, the moorend moved through the tall grass, 12 feet at the shoulder. Armored hide the color of storm clouds, spines along its back that could cut through steel. Every species in the galaxy called it a monster. Ruth called it beautiful. Her communicator buzzed. She ignored it. The moorend had stopped at the river's edge, and Ruth held her breath. For 3 weeks she had watched this particular creature. It always came to this spot at the same time. It always paused in the same way. And lately it had started doing something that made Ruth's heart race with scientific excitement. It looked up at her ridge. The communicator buzzed again, more urgent this time. Ruth, Director Prill's voice crackled through. Return to base, mandatory briefing. Ruth sighed and began packing her gear. Below, the moorend watched her leave. The survey station was a collection of domed structures huddled together like frightened animals. Ruth walked through the airlock to find her entire team waiting in the briefing room. Director Prill stood at the front, his insectoid body clicking with agitation. Beside him, Specialist Morrow shifted nervously on her 4 legs, her amphibian skin glistening under the lights. "We have reviewed your reports," Prill said without greeting, his compound eyes fixed on Ruth. "You have been observing the apex predator for 21 days. The moorend," Ruth corrected. "Yes. You have been moving closer to its territory. I have been following its patterns. There is a difference." Prill activated the holographic display. Footage played of the moorend hunting, its massive jaws crushing prey in a single bite. The team watched in silence. Ruth had seen this behavior dozens of times. What interested her was what came after. "Standard protocol requires a 500-meter safety distance," Prill continued. "You have been at 300 meters. Yesterday you were at 200. I know what I am doing." "Do you?" Morrow spoke up, her voice trembling. "That creature has killed every species that approached it. The Velkari sent a research team 5 years ago. None survived." Ruth nodded slowly. "The Velkari approached in groups, wearing armor, carrying weapons. They smelled like fear and aggression. The moorend responded appropriately." "Appropriately?" Prill's clicking grew louder. "It killed them. It defended itself." Ruth stood and walked to the display. She rewound the footage to a specific moment. "Look here, after the hunt, the moorend does not eat immediately. It waits. It checks its surroundings, not for threats, but for something else." "What?" Morrow asked. "I do not know yet, but look at its posture. This is not a mindless predator. This is a creature that thinks." The room fell silent. On the screen, the moorend lifted its massive head and looked directly at the camera drone. "It knows we are watching," Ruth said quietly, "and it has been watching back." Prill shut off the display. "This changes nothing. You will maintain proper distance. The Council has strict protocols about apex fauna." Ruth wanted to argue but held her tongue. She had learned long ago that some battles were won through patience, not words. Later that night, Morrow found her at the observation post. The Delvani biologist climbed the ridge carefully, her 4 arms gripping the rocks. "How do your people handle apex predators?" Morrow asked, settling beside Ruth. "On your homeworld." Ruth smiled in the darkness. "Earth has many apex predators: lions, wolves, bears, sharks. My grandmother raised wild dogs. My mother rehabilitated injured eagles. You lived alongside creatures that could kill you. We learned to understand them. Fear builds walls, understanding builds bridges." Morrow was quiet for a long moment. "The galaxy thinks humans are strange." "The galaxy is probably right." They sat together as the planet's twin moons rose. In the valley below, something moved through the grass. Ruth leaned forward, her heart beating faster. The moorend emerged from the tree line, but tonight it was not at the river. Tonight it was closer, much closer. Ruth grabbed her scanner and checked the readings. 200 meters, 150, 100. The creature stopped at the edge of the clearing below the ridge. It sat back on its haunches, those massive jaws closed, those deadly spines flat against its back. And then it did something that made Ruth's breath catch in her throat. It waited. Not hunting, not threatening, just waiting, looking up at the ridge where Ruth sat. "What is it doing?" Morrow whispered, terrified. Ruth did not answer. She was too busy looking at the ground near her observation blind. In the soft soil, barely visible in the moonlight, were tracks. Massive tracks. They circled the blind in a wide pattern, never coming too close, but clearly investigating. The Morend had been here before, not to hunt. To learn. Ruth looked down at the creature waiting in the darkness. It looked back at her. And in that moment, across the impossible gap between species, something passed between them. Recognition. "I think," Ruth said slowly, "that I have been asking the wrong question. I have been asking what this creature is. I should have been asking who." Below, the Morend rose and walked back into the forest. But before it disappeared, it turned one last time. Ruth could have sworn it nodded. 3 smooth stones sat in a row at the edge of the clearing. Ruth had placed them there yesterday morning. Now, as the sun rose over the valley, 2 of them were gone. She knelt in the dirt examining the ground. The tracks were unmistakable. The Morend had come in the night, studied the stones, and taken 2 of them, not scattered, not destroyed, taken. Ruth's hands trembled as she placed 3 new objects in their place. A woven circle of grass, a piece of polished wood, a feather from one of the local birds. "Ruth," Morrow's voice came through the communicator. "Your heart rate is elevated. Are you in danger?" "No," Ruth smiled. "I am excited." Those 2 feelings are very different for most species. Not for humans. She retreated to her observation blind and waited. The hours passed slowly. The sun climbed high and began its descent. Ruth did not move. She had learned patience from her grandmother, who once spent 4 months earning the trust of a wounded wolf. Time meant nothing when building a bridge between species. As the shadows grew long, the grass at the tree line moved. The Morend emerged slowly, its massive body flowing through the vegetation like water. Ruth had seen many predators in her life, but nothing matched the terrible grace of this creature. Every movement was controlled. Every step was silent despite its enormous weight. It stopped at the clearing's edge and studied the offerings. Its head tilted, first one way, then the other. Ruth watched as it sniffed each object carefully. Then, with surprising gentleness, it picked up the woven grass circle in its teeth and set it aside. "What are you doing?" Morrow whispered. Through the calm, "Ruth, it is only 50 meters away." Ruth did not answer. She was watching the Morend's body language. The spines were flat. The tail was relaxed. The eyes were curious, not aggressive. This was not a predator preparing to attack. This was an intelligent creature trying to solve a puzzle. The Morend looked up at the blind. It knew she was there. It had always known. Ruth made a decision that would change everything. She stood up and stepped out of the blind. Morrow screamed through the communicator. The sound was distant, unimportant. Ruth's entire world had narrowed to the creature before her. She walked forward slowly, keeping her hands visible, her posture relaxed. Every instinct in her body screamed to run. She ignored them all. The Morend watched her approach. It did not move, it did not growl, it simply waited. Ruth stopped at the edge of the clearing and sat down on the ground. She made herself small, non-threatening. She lowered her eyes, avoiding direct stare. These were signals that worked across species on Earth. She prayed they would work here. Minutes passed, neither moved. Then, with careful steps, the Morend approached. Ruth could smell it now, warm, musky, like forest and rain and something electric. She could hear its breathing, deep and slow. She could see the individual scales on its hide, each one as large as her palm. It stopped an arm's length away and lowered its massive head. Ruth held perfectly still as hot breath washed over her. The creature sniffed her hair, her shoulders, her hands. Its jaws could have ended her life in an instant. Instead, they remained closed. For 2 hours they stayed like that, human and apex predator sharing the same space. Ruth did not speak. She did not move. She simply existed beside this creature, letting it learn her scent, her presence, her patience. When the Morand finally moved, it did not retreat. Instead, it walked to where Ruth had left the offerings. It picked up the polished wood in its mouth, carried it back, and set it at her feet. A gift for a gift. Ruth felt tears streaming down her face. She did not wipe them away. "I will call you quiet," she whispered, "because you move without sound." The Morand tilted its head at her voice. Then slowly it settled onto the ground beside her, not touching but close, close enough to trust. Through the communicator, Ruth could hear Morrow crying. "Ruth," the Delvani said her. Voice broken with wonder, "How did you do that?" "I asked," Ruth replied, "and then I listened." The sun set over the valley. Ruth and Quiet sat together in the growing darkness, two species that should have been enemies, choosing instead to be something else entirely. When Director Prill's urgent message came through demanding Ruth's immediate return, she did not respond. Breaking contact now would destroy everything she had built. Some things were more important than protocols. Quiet turned her massive head and looked at Ruth. In those ancient eyes, Ruth saw something that the galaxy had missed for thousands of years. Intelligence, curiosity, and perhaps, just perhaps, the beginning of trust. "They said never approach the apex," Ruth murmured. Quiet exhaled softly, her warm breath gentle against Ruth's skin. "They never asked the apex what it wanted." 2 weeks had passed since Ruth first touched Quiet's hide. Now she walked through the valley without fear, the massive Morand moving beside her like a shadow. The galaxy would have called it impossible. Ruth called it Tuesday. She had learned so much in these 14 days. Quiet communicated through body language, through subtle shifts in her spines, through sounds too low for most species to hear. Ruth had filled 3 notebooks with observations. The Morans were not mindless predators. They were a pre-sapient species with complex social behaviors, family structures, and something that looked remarkably like culture. Today, Quiet led her somewhere new. They walked deeper into the forest than Ruth had ever gone. The trees grew thick here, their purple leaves blocking out the sun. Ruth followed without hesitation. She had learned to read Quiet's moods. Right now, the Morand was calm but purposeful. She had something to show. A rocky cliff rose from the forest floor. In its face, hidden by hanging vines, was a cave entrance. Quiet stopped and looked at Ruth. "You want me to go in there?" Quiet's spines rippled in what Ruth had learned was a yes. The cave was dark but warm. Ruth switched on her light and gasped. The walls were covered in scratches, patterns carved into the stone over what must have been generations. Some looked like maps, others looked like figures. This was not random marking. This was history. "Your people made these," Ruth breathed. Quiet moved past her deeper into the cave. Ruth followed. They emerged into a larger chamber, and Ruth stopped cold. 3 juvenile Morans lay on a bed of dried grass. They were small, no larger than earth dogs, their spines soft and undeveloped, and they were sick. Ruth could see it immediately. Their breathing was labored. Their scales had lost their shine. One of them tried to lift its head when Quiet approached, but could not manage it. Quiet turned to Ruth, and in the creature's eyes, Ruth saw something universal. Desperation, fear, hope. "You brought me here because they are sick," Ruth said slowly. "You knew I could help." Quiet's spines rippled. Ruth pulled out her communicator with shaking hands. "Morrow, I need you. Bring the medical kit, the full one." "Ruth, what is happening?" "I will explain when you arrive. Track my location, and Morrow, hurry." The wait was agony. Ruth knelt beside the juveniles, running her scanner over their bodies. Some kind of parasite had invaded their respiratory systems. On Earth, she had seen similar infections in young wolves, treatable if caught in time. Quiet paced the cave, her massive body tense with worry. Every few minutes she would stop and touch her nose to one of her children. Ruth had never seen anything so heartbreaking. Morrow arrived an hour later, her forearms loaded with equipment and her eyes wide with terror. Ruth, I am in a cave with 4 apex predators. 3 of them are babies, and one of them is their mother who trusted me enough to show me this place. Now help me. To her credit, Morrow pushed down her fear and got to work. They cleaned airways, administered antiparasitics, and set up monitoring equipment. Quiet watched every move, her eyes never leaving Ruth's hands. How did she know? Morrow whispered as they worked. How did she know you would help? Ruth looked at Quiet. She watched me. For weeks, she watched me. She saw that I came without weapons. She saw that I left gifts instead of traps. She saw that I sat with her without demanding anything. Ruth gently lifted a juvenile's head to clear its breathing. She recognized kindness. The treatment took hours. By the time they finished, all 3 juveniles were breathing easier. One of them even managed to stand on shaky legs. Quiet approached Ruth slowly. Then she did something that made both researchers freeze. She lowered her massive head and began grooming Ruth's hair. Long, gentle strokes with her tongue, the same way Ruth had seen her groom her children. That is a bonding behavior, Morrow said, her voice cracking, reserved for family. Ruth could not speak. Tears streamed down her face as the apex predator accepted her as one of her own. They emerged from the cave at sunset. Morrow was changed. The terror in her eyes had been replaced by wonder. She had witnessed something that would reshape how she saw the universe. But their peace was short-lived. Director Prill was waiting at the observation post, his body clicking with fury. Beside him stood a holographic figure Ruth did not recognize. Ruth Okonkwo, the hologram said. I am Representative Yeln of the Galactic Council. You have violated 17 protocols regarding apex fauna contact. You have endangered your team and contaminated a protected ecosystem. Ruth stood her ground. Behind her, unseen in the forest, Quiet waited. I have discovered a presapient species, Ruth said calmly. They have language, culture, and family bonds. Your protocols are based on ignorance. Yeln's holographic face twisted with contempt. You have 1 day to submit to review, or we will remove you from this planet by force. After they left, Ruth sat alone on the ridge. The twin moons rose over the valley. In the darkness, she heard Quiet approaching. They want to take me away, Ruth said quietly. Quiet settled beside her, warm and solid and real. I will not let them hurt you, Ruth promised, no matter what it costs me. The Morand pressed her massive head against Ruth's shoulder. Some promises did not need translation. Rain fell on Bastion 7 for the first time since Ruth's arrival. The drops were warm and smelled of copper, and they drummed against the leaves in a rhythm that felt ancient. Ruth walked through the forest with Quiet beside her. The juveniles had recovered enough to follow, their small bodies bouncing through the undergrowth with the clumsy energy of youth. Ruth had named them in her mind. The largest was Bold, always running ahead. The middle one was Dreamer, often stopping to examine flowers and insects. The smallest was Shadow, who stayed close to her mother's flank. Quiet had been leading them deeper into the wilderness for hours. Ruth did not ask where they were going. She had learned that the Morand would show her when she was ready. The forest opened into a clearing unlike any Ruth had seen. Massive stone pillars rose from the earth, covered in the same carved patterns she had found in Quiet's cave. But these were larger, more complex. They told stories Ruth could not yet read but desperately wanted to understand. At the center of the clearing stood a pool of water, perfectly still despite the rain. Around it, sitting in a wide circle, were more Morans. Ruth stopped breathing. There were at least 20 of them, males and females, young and old. They watched her approach with eyes that held no hostility, only intense curiosity. Quiet had brought her to her family. One of the Morans rose and approached. It was larger than Quiet, its scales marked with scars from countless battles. An elder, Ruth realized, perhaps a leader. The elder stopped before Ruth and lowered its head until they were eye to eye. Ruth could see herself reflected in those ancient eyes. a small, fragile human in a place where no other species had ever been allowed. The elder made a sound, low and rumbling. Quiet responded. They were talking, Ruth realized, actually communicating in a language she was only beginning to understand. Then the elder did something extraordinary. It stepped aside and gestured with its head toward the stone pillars. "You want me to look?" Ruth asked. Quiet's spines rippled. Ruth walked to the nearest pillar and ran her fingers over the carvings. Up close, she could make out details she had missed before. These were not just patterns. They were records, birth announcements, death memorials, maps of territories, histories of conflicts and alliances. The Morans had been recording their civilization for generations. "This changes everything," Ruth whispered. Her communicator buzzed. Morrow's voice came through, tight with fear. "Ruth, you need to know. A Council enforcement vessel arrived in orbit an hour ago. They are sending a team to the surface." Ruth's blood ran cold. "What are their orders?" "I overheard Director Prill arguing with them. Ruth, they are calling you compromised. They say the Morans are too dangerous to study. They want to neutralize the threat." "Neutralize means kill." "Yes." Ruth looked at Quiet, at the juveniles playing in the rain, at the 20 Morans who had welcomed her into their sacred place. "How long do I have?" "They land at dawn." Ruth closed her eyes. She had one night to make the most important decision of her life. The rain stopped as darkness fell. Ruth sat by the pool, watching the stars emerge through the clouds. The Morans had settled around the clearing, their bodies forming a protective circle. The juveniles slept in a pile near Quiet, their soft breathing the only sound. Quiet approached and lay beside her. The great head rested on Ruth's lap, a gesture of complete trust that still made Ruth's heart ache. "They are coming for you," Ruth said softly. "For all of you. They think you are monsters because you are powerful. They do not understand that you are gentle." Quiet's eyes found hers in the darkness. "I could run. I could go back to the station and pretend this never happened. I could save my career, my reputation, my place in the galaxy." Ruth stroked the warm scales under her hand. "But I would lose my soul." The Morand made a low sound, almost like a question. "You trusted me," Ruth continued. "You showed me your children when they were sick. You brought me to your family's sacred place. You accepted me." Her voice cracked. "No one in the galaxy has ever trusted me like that." She looked up at the stars, thinking of Earth, of her grandmother, of all the people who had taught her that the bond between species was sacred. "I will not betray that trust," she said. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I will stand with you." Quiet rose to her feet. She looked at Ruth for a long moment. Then she did something that made Ruth's heart stop. She knelt. The massive Morand lowered herself to the ground, flattening her spines against her back, presenting her flank to Ruth. Ruth understood. She had seen horses do this. Dogs, animals that chose their partners, their riders, their companions. Quiet was offering herself. With trembling hands, Ruth reached out and pulled herself onto the Morand's back. She settled between the flattened spines, her legs gripping the warm sides, her hands finding holds in the thick scales. Quiet rose smoothly, carrying Ruth as if she weighed nothing. Around the clearing, the other Morans lifted their heads and watched. One by one, they rose and gathered behind Quiet. Ruth looked down at the world from her new height. She was no longer just an observer. She was part of something larger, something the galaxy had never seen. "Let them come," she said. Quiet began to walk, and her family followed, and Ruth rode the apex into the darkness. Commander Sethais had hunted dangerous species across 50 worlds. He had led containment operations on planets that made Bastion 7 look like a garden. Nothing in the galaxy frightened him anymore. That changed when he found the empty cave. His enforcement team had landed at dawn, armed with enough firepower to level a mountain. Director Prill had tried to stop them at the station. Sethais had ignored him. The Council's orders were clear: neutralize the apex threat and recover the compromised human. But when they reached the den coordinates from the survey logs, They found only scratches on stone and cold ashes where fires had burned. She warned them, one of his soldiers said. Sethai stared at the cave walls, at the patterns he did not understand. The xenobiologist had spent weeks studying these creatures. She knew things about them that no other species in the galaxy knew. And she had chosen them over her own kind. Spread out, Sethai's ordered. Find their trail. The hunt lasted 3 days. Ruth and the Morans moved through the wilderness like ghosts. Quiet knew every valley, every hidden path, every place where the trees grew thick enough to hide 20 massive bodies. The juveniles rode on the backs of the larger adults when they grew tired. Ruth stayed on Quiet, learning to move with her, to anticipate her steps, to become one with the creature that had become her family. They were not running blindly. Ruth understood that now. Quiet was leading them somewhere specific. The other Morans deferred to her, following her signals, trusting her judgment. She was not just a mother, she was a leader. On the 3rd night, they stopped at a cliff face that overlooked a vast canyon. The twin moons hung low over the horizon, painting the world in silver and shadow. "Why here?" Ruth asked. Quiet turned and looked back the way they had come. Ruth followed her gaze and saw lights in the distance. The enforcement team was close. Ruth climbed down from Quiet's back and walked to the cliff edge. Below, the canyon stretched for miles, its bottom lost in darkness. Behind her, the Morans gathered, their eyes reflecting moonlight like stars come to earth. There was nowhere left to run. "They will not stop," Ruth said quietly. "They will keep hunting until they find us." Quiet approached and pressed her head against Ruth's shoulder. Around them, the other Morans made low sounds of concern. The juveniles huddled close to their elders. Ruth thought about what the council saw when they looked at these creatures. Monsters, threats, problems to be eliminated. They did not see the way Quiet groomed her children. They did not see the elder teaching the young. Ones at the sacred stones. They did not see the gift-giving, the family bonds, the culture that had developed over countless generations. They saw only what they feared. "I am tired of running," Ruth said. She pulled out her communicator and opened a channel to the survey station. "Director Prill, can you hear me?" Static then. "Ruth, where are you? The enforcement team has been searching for days." "I know. I need you to do something for me." "Anything." "Connect me to the Galactic Network. Every channel, every frequency. I want the entire galaxy to see what happens next." Prill hesitated. "Ruth, that could end your career." "Some things are more important than careers." The lights grew closer. Ruth could hear the hum of enforcement vehicles now, the stomp of armored boots through the forest. Sethai's was coming. She turned to Quiet. "I need you to trust me one more time. Whatever happens, do not attack, do not fight, just stay." Quiet's spines rippled with uncertainty, but she held her ground. The enforcement team emerged from the tree line in a wall of weapons and armor. Sethai's walked at their center, his face hard with determination. When he saw Ruth standing among the Morans, he stopped. "Ruth Okonkwo," he said, "you are ordered to surrender and return with us immediately." Ruth did not move, and the Morans, "They will be neutralized as per council directive." "No." Sethai's raised his weapon. "This is not a negotiation." "You are right." Ruth stepped forward, placing herself between the soldiers and the creatures behind her. "This is a choice. You can kill them, you can kill me, but the entire galaxy is watching right now. Director Prill connected me to every broadcast channel in council space." Sethai's froze. "You are bluffing." "Am I?" Ruth turned and gestured to Quiet. The massive Morand approached slowly, her movements careful and deliberate. She stopped beside Ruth and lowered her head, showing her flank, showing her trust. "This is Quiet," Ruth said, knowing billions of beings were watching across the stars. "She is a mother of 3. She brought me to her children when they were sick because she recognized kindness. She showed me her family's sacred places, their history carved in stone, their stories passed down through generations." Ruth put her hand on Quiet's scales. The Morans are not monsters, they are people. Different from us, yes, dangerous, yes, but people, and we do not kill. People simply because we fear them. The soldiers shifted uncomfortably. Sethai's weapon wavered. Lower your weapons, Ruth said, or explain to the galaxy why you murdered a mother in front of her children. The silence stretched like a held breath. Then one by one, the weapons dropped. Sethai stood alone, his arms still raised. His eyes moved from Ruth to quiet to the watching Morans. For a moment, Ruth thought he would fire anyway. But even hunters have limits. His weapon fell to his side. Ruth let out a breath she had been holding for 3 days. Behind her, quiet made a sound like thunder rolling over mountains. The other Morans joined in, a chorus that shook the air. It sounded like victory. 1 year later, Ruth stood on the ridge where everything had begun. The valley below had changed. Where there had once been only wilderness, there now stood a small settlement of domed structures. Not a military outpost or a containment facility, but a research station designed around a simple principle: coexistence. Humans had come to Bastion 7. Not many, just a handful who had watched Ruth's broadcast and felt something stir in their souls. They came to learn, to study, to build bridges with the species the galaxy had written off as monsters. The Galactic Council had been forced to reclassify Bastion 7 as a protected contact world. Ruth's broadcast had made neutralizing the Morans politically impossible. Billions had watched a human woman stand between soldiers and apex predators, asking only for the right to exist together. The galaxy had never seen anything like it. Ruth heard heavy footsteps behind her and smiled without turning. Quiet emerged from the forest and climbed the ridge with easy grace. The great Moran had changed too. There was gray in her scales now, marks of age that Ruth had learned to read. But her eyes were still bright, still curious, still full of the intelligence that the galaxy had almost destroyed without understanding. "Good morning," Ruth said. Quiet settled beside her, her warmth pressing against Ruth's side. Below in the valley, Bold and Dreamer and Shadow moved through the settlement, fully grown now and curious about the strange, soft creatures who had come to their world. The human researchers had learned to read Moran body language. The Morans had learned that humans meant no harm. It was not perfect. There had been mistakes, misunderstandings, moments of fear on both sides, but every day the bridge grew stronger. A message crackled through Ruth's communicator. "Ambassador Okonkwo, the council representative, has arrived for the annual review." Ambassador, Ruth still was not used to the title. After her broadcast, the council had faced a choice: prosecute her or promote her. They had chosen the path that made them look best. Ruth did not care about their reasons. She cared about the results. "Tell them I will be there shortly." She stood and looked at Quiet. "Want to come? You know they are still terrified of you." Quiet's spines rippled with what Ruth had learned was amusement. The Morand rose and stretched, her massive body blocking out the sun for a moment. "I will take that as a yes." They walked down the ridge together, human and apex predator, their steps falling into the easy rhythm of old friends. Other Morans emerged from the forest to join them. Word had spread through their network that the small, soft creature who had changed everything was walking to meet the sky beings. By the time Ruth reached the settlement, she had an escort of 15 Morans. The council representative, a trembling insectoid named Brell, stood at the landing pad with Director Prill and Morrow. Brell's compound eyes fixed on the approaching procession. "This is unprecedented." "Most things about this world are," Ruth replied. "Welcome to Bastion 7, Representative. The Council has questions about your methods. Your reports suggest you have been allowing Morans into the research facility." "Not allowing, inviting. There is a difference." Brell's mandibles clicked nervously. "Ambassador Okonkwo, these creatures nearly killed an enforcement team." "No," Ruth's voice was calm but firm. "They nearly defended themselves from an enforcement team that came to kill them. There is a difference in that, too." Quiet lowered her head and looked directly at Brell. The representative stumbled backward, nearly falling. Morrow caught him with her forearms. "She will not hurt you," Morrow said. "She is just curious. She wants to understand what you are." Brell stared at the Delvani. "You speak as if these things are people." "They are people," Morrow smiled, "just different from us." The review lasted 3 hours. Ruth answered questions, showed data, explained the social structures and communication patterns she had documented. She talked about the sacred stones and the family bonds and the way. The Morans cared for their young. Through it all, Quiet waited outside, patient as stone. When the representative finally left, shaken but enlightened, Ruth walked back to the ridge. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Quiet followed. "He was scared," Ruth said. "They all are." Quiet made a low sound. "I know they will learn, it just takes time." She climbed onto Quiet's back, settling into the familiar position between the flattened spines. Below, the research station's lights flickered on. In the forest, Morans called to each other in their deep, rumbling voices. "They said never ride the apex," Ruth murmured. Quiet began to move, carrying Ruth along the ridge as the first stars emerged overhead. They did not understand. Ruth leaned forward and pressed her cheek against the warm scales. The apex was never about riding something dangerous. It was about becoming something more, something that bridges the gap between fear and understanding. The wind carried her words across the valley. "I was the apex all along, the apex of what humanity could be." Quiet's rumbling voice rose to join the chorus of her family in the forest. Ruth closed her eyes and listened to the song of a world that had almost been destroyed by fear. But fear had lost, and in its place, something beautiful had grown. Below them in the settlement, a human child laughed as Bold bent down to sniff her hair. Morrow watched with tears in her eyes. Director Prill recorded everything for the archives. And across the galaxy, billions of beings watched broadcasts from Bastion 7 and wondered if maybe, just maybe, they had been wrong about monsters all along. Ruth rode into the darkness, carried by the creature the galaxy had feared, loved by the family she had chosen, ready for whatever tomorrow would bring. The apex had found its rider, and together they were unstoppable.